inclusive world building in sci-fi and fantasy panel. I'm Gillian St. Kevin. I am hosting this discussion today, and I am really excited because it's going to be fantastic. We have Jamie Sands, Valentine Wheeler, JP Jackson, and Rebecca Longham. I did not say that correctly, joining us today. And yeah, I am going to let our participants introduce themselves. So we're going to start with Jamie, just because we've got to show some New Zealander solidarity here. Jamie.
Hi, hello. I am, as Gillian says, from New Zealand. I've been writing a while, mostly self-publishing and urban fantasy, romance, contemporary romance, paranormal, pirate stuff under a secret name. I don't know what else to say. I'm in Auckland. It is grey and rainy, and I have a cat who may or may not jump in at some point.
I am here for Mochi joining us. That would be amazing. Let's continue the Southern Hemisphere vibe and say hi to Rebecca.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Langham, and I too will have some random appearances from both children and cats. So hopefully everyone's okay with that. I have absolutely no authority here. I mostly write fantasy and science fiction. Every now and then I'll delve into romance, but yeah, I've got a sci-fi duology and a fantasy novella around. And I live kind of west of Sydney, sort of near the Blue Mountains. Very excited to hang out with you all.
Awesome. So I think that Val is slightly more south than Jeff. So Val, you go next.
All right. I'm Valentine Wheeler. I write everything. I have romance, contemporary romance novel, and a couple of novellas. Bunch of sci-fi short stories. One of which is I've been told is horror, but I disagree. And I also edit Wizards in Space magazine and Mermaids Monthly magazine, and read for a bunch of other venues.
I can tell that Jamie has some questions about Mermaids Monthly. But before we get there, Jeff, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm coming to you from the great Canadian White North, except it's raining now today. I'm from Edmonton, Alberta. I write as JP Jackson, and I write dark urban fantasy / side dish of horror, and my newest novel is male paranormal romance. It's more actually
Yay.
urban fantasy with a sexy fun time in it.
Awesome.
I'm excited for that one.
Jeff, a few hours ago, hosted a panel on queer horror readings in which he read from his novel Daimonian, and it was very exciting. But yeah, to kick off the discussion, what draws you to science fiction and fantasy as a genre? Because there's so many stories out there we could be telling. Why these stories? And let's start with Jeff, since he was last time.
Have to find the unmute button. I like horns, wings, tails, magic, anything that goes bump in the night. I am down for that. But for me, I think the reason why I gravitate so strongly towards urban fantasy, particularly, is because of the possibilities. I can do so much within my world, granted within my own rules that I set up, but it's limitless. I can do just about anything, and that's exciting for me. I get to dance the line between dark and light and have a good time.
So, actually, building on what you said about the limitless potentials of these fiction and what Rebecca said earlier about having no authority in her house, Rebecca, is the does being able to write stories and make people do what you want them to do Is that part of the appeal for you?
Look, probably. I imagine that all writers have got a certain degree of narcissistic control over their characters, surely. But look, it's probably a lot like what Jeff was saying. But one of the things that I really love about science fiction, especially really, really well done science fiction, is that it gives us this ability to take contemporary issues and look at them through a sort of safer space. Um, I think a lot of the world's best sci-fi is actually about the present, but it uses a spaceship, or it uses a fantasy world, or it uses some sort of futuristic setting to make commentary about those contemporary issues in a way that is probably a lot safer than talking about it in the real and the now. A lot of sci-fi extrapolates the future from the present, and I just think that's so much fun, because obviously whatever we're doing now, there's so many different ways that it could still branch off, so many different cool things or interesting things or scary things that could happen. And so I guess a bit of control. We get to pick which one of those paths we're going to play with. And it could be dark, or it could be really bright, or it could be somewhere in the middle. And I love doing that. But at the same time, another type of writing I've fallen in love with recently is just really fun stuff. Like I wrote a novella called Finding Aurora, which is just short and PG rated, kid friendly. And it's just a retelling of Sleeping Beauty. Like, there's 7 million retellings of Sleeping Beauty, but it didn't matter. I made mine gay, and I made my prince asexual, and it, and that was just fun, and it was nice, and it was really easy to write, and I just had a good time. And I have no cool political reason for that. It was just a good time.
I want you to know that I just published like 3 months ago a queer Cinderella with an ace prince, so high five.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, I'll have to check that out. That sounds great.
We're gonna have to trade. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
I'm just going to cut in very quickly and say that on the Discord, there is a channel called Readings Book Links, which I encourage you, even though this isn't a reading, to put your books in there. Any book that we touch on. We also have a channel for the inclusive world building that you can please share your stuff in. If not right now, because we all have to focus and answer questions, but after this discussion. So Val, what attracts you to sci-fi fantasy?
Well, I think it's very similar to what the previous two folks have mentioned. I think that something I really love about speculative fiction as a huge whole category is that when you take away a lot of the assumptions we make about our world, you can explore how people relate to each other in a different way. And as Rebecca said, apply it to today. If you take post-apocalyptic literature as like the biggest way to take everything away from your characters, you strip everything down, and suddenly all you have is just people, and they're just existing in their own like horrible and wonderful way. And that can be good or bad. I went on a post-apocalyptic reading spree about 2 years ago. Thank goodness it was 2 years ago and not this year. But I read about probably 30 or 40 post-apocalyptic books in a row, and it convinced me never to write post-apocalyptic literature. But the best ones all talked about sort of what people are at their core and what they need at their core and what they don't need. And I feel like that's what you can do when you change the setting so dramatically to something that isn't something you can see in this world. You can strip everything out and build it back up in a really interesting sort of way.
Need to unmute myself. That's really cool. I've been getting a lot of ideas for post-apocalyptic fiction, which I don't read and I haven't written yet. And I think it's purely because of like real life circumstances. But yeah, Jamie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what other people have said, like just the idea of limitless kind of possibilities. But for me, it's also partly that I like to be able to go, okay, this is a magical world, therefore there is no homophobia, or therefore people aren't gonna, you know, come down on this person for presenting with a different gender. And you can kind of just hand wave it because you're like, well, there's magic, so why are people worried about that, you know? So taking something that bugs me in the real world and just removing it and being able to tell a story about those people having a happy life or just doing cool stuff without that same narrative of why are you gay or coming out story or that stuff, which I don't like writing so much. Yeah.
That actually leads so perfectly into my next question, which is what unique opportunities for telling LGBTQIA plus stories does sci-fi and fantasy have? And that was pure coincidence. I did not prompt Jamie. I did not bribe them.
Oh, you're
Thank you.
welcome.
But yeah, does anyone want to build on what Jamie said? I think Rebecca kind of alluded to it when
Sure.
yeah.
I'm a high school teacher, so I understand the pain of asking a question and everyone's like, oh. Yeah, look, sorry, the cat's getting restless now. Come
Hi,
here.
kitty.
This
What's
is
his
Luna.
name? Luna.
Yeah.
Lovely. Hi, Luna.
She's a very cuddly little girl. Yeah, look, one of the I think gender and sexuality, sci-fi and speculative fiction in general have always been one of the leading genres for pushing. You okay, Bubba? Yeah. Okay. For pushing boundaries and asking interesting questions about gender. I mean, you go back to, you know, like Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. You know, like what an incredible book, especially for when it was written. Oh, you're showing them another cat, honey. Good job. We've got lots of cats. All right, you want to put him down now? I think he's a bit scared. Put him down, Bubba. All right. I'm sorry. There are always going to be guest appearances at my place.
Yeah, the cat did not expect to be discussing inclusive world building.
Yeah. And you know, there's lots of texts that have done interesting things with gender. Like Octavia Butler's books, I just find amazing. Her Xenogenesis's trilogy, sorry. You know, it has some amazing things. This is Thea. That it looks at with gender, you know, and it's been that way for a long time. And those books are actually still considered controversial or unusual in how they treat gender and sexuality. And a lot of them were written decades ago, which is just incredible to me. So one of the things in my duology, Beneath the Surface and Breaking the Surface, that I had a lot of fun with was my alien race, because I could kind of do I think it was what Jamie was saying. You can just get rid of the things that you don't like about people's attitudes to gender and just create what you like. So my alien race, it was nothing overly original, but very gender fluid. They chose their gender. It wasn't imposed on them at birth. You know, they could change it should they wish to, and they were actually biologically designed so that if their emotional gender changed, then their physical body would actually follow suit if they wanted it to. And that was just, you know, that was good. It was exciting. I'm sorry, they're very distracting, I know, but this is just my reality. You can see why I take 2 years to write one book.
Yeah, it's actually I have a 3-year-old nephew and a 6-year-old niece, and one of the things that really surprised me is how not so much my nephew, he hasn't quite hit that age yet, but my niece is just so strict on gender roles. She's like, no, a girl can't be a pilot. That's a boy's job. This person's a girl. This person's a boy. We had major arguments over whether or not Rainbow Dash was a girl because she did not fit my niece's perception of what girls are. And it's just so ingrained in our culture that you kind of you have to take a massive step back to get away from that mindset and looking at our world through alien eyes. is a pretty good way to go about it. Mm. Does anyone else have any thoughts on the unique opportunities of sci-fi and fantasy for us LGBTQ authors?
I do.
Listen.
It's one of my taglines I say all the time. I write these fantastical, dark, magical stories because when I was growing up, and I might be fairly old, um, growing up in the early '80s and whatnot, I didn't find any fiction that had people like me in them in the stories that I wanted to read. So I had to sit down and write my own. Um, in doing that, I put people like me as the hero or anti-hero. Most of my guys are anti-heroes, but even still, we had the lead. And as much as I needed to see people like me being the hero, I need the rest of the world to see that we can be the heroes.
Mhm.
And I don't have to base it in reality. It can be as magical and fantastical and dark as I want it to be, but we get to be the center of attention.
Yeah, it's
I
really
so hear you
powerful.
on that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we in the discussion for the editing panel, Jillian and Jamie and I were chatting a couple hours ago about fan fiction and how it has impacted the world of romance and speculative fiction writing in the last 20 years. And I think that something that's really powerful is that the first generation of people to queer people mostly who were on the internet and sharing stories about the people that they were watching on TV or reading about in books are now grown-ups who are writing our own books. And I think that that's really changed how fiction is these days. I mean, you see Shauna Maguire talking about her fan fiction career. You see Naomi Novik, who came out of fandom and was, like the queen of fandom before becoming an incredibly popular author. Um, and I think that has really shifted how people build their worlds a little bit. I mean, obviously, there's still the traditional authors. There's still um, George R. R. Martin writing. Apparently, he's still writing. He claims, but there's a whole new crop coming in. N.K. Jemisin it is a huge fan of fan works, and I believe was a fan writer before becoming the first ever 3 in a row Hugo winner. Um, it's a whole different community than it was when Octavia Butler was the one, the only, the person writing gender stuff. Um, and even people like John Scalzi, who is not a queer writer, but puts queer characters in all of his work because he's, pretty good cis white dude. Um, so yeah, I think the climate is changing, and I think that people like us are part of it, and that makes me happy.
It is really good to hear. I have warm fuzzies, so thank you for that. So, since this is a world building panel, the next question I have is what is your approach to world building? Where do you start? And do you have any rules or a framework that you stick to when kind of creating a new world?
I can jump in this one because I'm always excited about world building. I actually have a map right behind me of Tamara Pierce's Tortal world. Um,
I
Jamie,
have Tamara
we need
Pierce
to talk.
books
Oh,
on
right
the
behind you.
bookshelf behind you.
Oh,
Yeah,
God,
look.
that makes me so
Realms
Mine
of
are in another
Magic.
room, but
Yeah, I've got the cover of Wild Magic over there too. Um,
Oh, that
anyway,
was my first and favorite.
anyway, um, for me, world building needs to start at both ends. What makes the people different from who we are, and what makes the rules different if you know what the rules look like, you know, does gravity work the same? Do we have physics? Does the government work the same? And you know, are the people, do they have wings? Can they summon demons? Etc. Those two are going to meet in the middle and you've got everything explained. You know, you can fill in as you go, but once you know those two things, you can extrapolate everything else. And that's what I like to do. I really like building worlds. Even in my non-spec fic, my favorite part is making a spreadsheet of all the people and figuring out how they're all connected and why and who dated 20 years ago and are still bitter about it and all that stuff.
I love those intersocial connections. I I think we don't really see enough of them in writing. It's usually the main couple, I guess, because we see a lot of romance. But I am here for embarrassing high school acquaintances that you can't quite get rid of, and all the rest of it. So, Rebecca, things seem quiet on your end. What are your world building thoughts?
Look, this is actually an area where I want to try new ways of doing it. So, for example, I don't know if anyone here has been reading Jen Lyons. She's sort of newer to the world of spec fic, but like she's freaking incredible. I honestly think that her Chorus of Dragons series is much better than a Game of Thrones. And she is very inclusive. And she has a set schedule of how often each book comes out. So you get one book per year. The fourth one's just come out and the fifth one's coming out next year. And she is such a pleasure to follow online because she does talk about world building. And I need to be like Jen Lyons because she actually creates a wiki, like a private wiki, because her worlds are so in depth. Like it just blows me away. The level of detail is incredible and it's so consistent. And her characters also reincarnate. So they have all these complex relationships from past lives and they change gender and sex both within their lifetime and from the reincarnated lifetimes. And it's like, how did you keep all of this straight? And she actually makes wikis and she makes all these like drop down menus and things about everything from how does the afterlife work to who is this god, relationships. Yeah, she's got some really interesting blogs and she shares screen shots of her world building. So I don't do that, but I want to learn her ways because, you know, there's a reason that she's such a phenomenal best-selling writer now because she's damn good. But in terms of my first duology, and they were my babies, like my first one, I read it now and I kind of cringe a bit. I'm like, oh, I really want to rewrite this, but that's not how this works. But with the world building, see, like for me, it went character outwards, if that makes any sense. So I tend to be a really character driven person where I don't even have a plot. Sometimes when I first get an idea, I just see the character. There you go, Jeff. And so when I wrote Beneath the Surface, I just had Alessia. Like she's the sort of central alien character out of the cast. I could just see her. I didn't have a plot and I didn't have a world. I just had this character. And then when I thought about what I wanted her to be like and how I wanted her to interact with other people, well, then other characters started to appear. And then in order for them to have the interactions that I wanted them to have, the world had to be a certain way. And then from there it grew. But I have a tendency to lead with authority and power relationships in my world building. Like it's, again, interrelated with character. So what's this character's sort of position in society? Where do they have opportunities for authority or power or self-determination? And then what kind of world will facilitate those interactions and that sort of growth for that character? So I'm a bit haphazard with my world building sometimes. And often in my editing, I actually go back and then start to make all these notes about, well, what did I write about my world? I didn't actually necessarily plan the whole world first. I just wrote the thing. And then second or third draft, I go back and I start going, okay, so I said this about this place, and I said this about this rule, and I mentioned a law here. Okay, do I want to keep that, or do I need to change it, or do I need to weave it through? And I do this sort of weird backward mapping thing, but weirdly enough, a lot of it actually stays pretty consistent. It's like your brain just knows what you want to create. Not very articulate, is it? I'm supposed to be a writer, but hopefully that makes sense.
We are writers, we are not talkers. There's a big difference.
Yeah, it's true. I actually do. Like, if I have a student ask me how to spell a word, I have to actually write it down. I can't just tell them how to spell the word. I have to get a pen and write it down and then go, oh, that's how you spell it. Because it doesn't come from my mouth. I've got to write it.
Yeah.
That's how I spell. Honestly, I know I have enough knowledge of ASL that I'll actually spell something with my.
My son's taking ASL, so I've been sitting on his lessons because he's 5, and so he can't actually do a lesson by himself. And yeah, now he and I spell each other back and forth all the time, and it drives my spouse crazy.
Nice.
So Jeff,
adding on to your adding on to your world building, going back focus. Words hard, brain no go. I kind of like Rebecca. First few times that I sat down and wrote a book, I really didn't have a clue what the hell I was doing. I just thought, oh, I can do this, and away I went, and took a long time, and then it took a lot of editors, a lot of work to make it into something worthwhile. And even now, I go back and read it and go, oh. But while I was doing it, a friend of mine who I work with said, I'd love to read it. I'd love to be a beta reader for you. And he came back to me afterwards and he goes, you did a pretty good job. I'm surprised. But you know what you did? And his words will stick with me forever. You created a world, you gave me the rules, and I don't care what book I pick up, as long as you can build your paradigm and stick to your rules. I'm going to go for the ride. But you have to stick to the rules. The minute you break your own rules, you've lost your reader. So I try and do that. And I mean, I know a couple of you have read it, but Daemonian was my first book. And I had one reader describe it as the TV show Supernatural, if from the demon's perspective, if the demon was gay. And I'm like, oh my God, that's perfect. And when I stop and I think about Supernatural, the TV show, and what they've done with it, their world building is insane. And the imagery, everything is consistent. I mean, even though I look out, my window and it could very much be the apocalypse and all the rest of it, Supernatural just took it one step further. Everything is kind of decayed, right? Every house they go into has got some level of age to it, and there's things that are just going wrong, and it just mimics their world. And I think you need to find those kinds of elements in your books to make sure that you're layering on top of your previous chapter, or layering on from one conversation to the next, those different elements to just kind of make this rich texture of a story.
So once again, this wasn't planned. I did not bribe Jeff to give that answer, but it just leads perfectly into my next question, which is that the suspension of disbelief is integral to any form of world building. How do you ensure that your world remains believable to readers, even given that your setting may be entirely on a different planet? It may be our world with a few slight changes. How do you maintain that suppression of disbelief? Okay.
I can
So-
try this one.
Who are you indicating?
Jamie.
You
Okay.
Jamie.
You, Jamie. Go.
Hi. For me, I'm not a plotter. I'm not very good at plotting. I have only been doing this pretty recently. I used to just be a fly the seat of pants kind of writer, So when I started having to actually really think about world building, I started to rely really heavily on my beta readers because my brain isn't the kind of brain that will sit and write a whole wiki about all of the details of the world. I'm not good at that. I've got like a Google Doc with notes for different series, or I've got a physical book for one of my series. If I write it down, I can remember it better. So when it comes to suspension of disbelief, I write it and I send it to my beta reader, who is really good at continuity. And she will also say, you said this, but also 3 chapters ago, you said this completely opposite thing. So you might want to fix that up. But what really cracks me up is that beta readers will see different stuff. So I wrote this book, Overdues and Occultism, which is about a witch librarian. And I based a whole lot of what happened off when I used to be a librarian, like 10, 15 years ago. And one of my beta readers came back and said, I don't understand how the library is so poorly managed. Like, surely the supervisors would be, all over this. And I'm like, well, you've clearly never worked in a public library system. Like, and that was the thing that they had problems with, rather than like the magic or the haunted books or the ghosts. Like, it's sort of getting that feedback and then balancing it on what I think the world should be, and then making whatever adjustments so that it makes sense. Does that make sense? It's a very, very vague kind of way to answer the question, but that's how it works.
That makes total sense to me. Beta readers are just so important and can be so useful. Val, do you have anything to add?
I do. I have 2 things. First, the point about if you can follow the rules, we're along for the ride. I have just reread the Dune series, which is a beloved, very problematic, but deeply beloved book of mine. And the first 6 are perfectly aligned because they're written by one person, and then his son takes over. And I was really, really invested in the prequels that he wrote, was really invested in the first couple sequels, and then he made a mistake. He said a character was from someplace he wasn't, and it ruined it. I'll never read another one of his books because he didn't keep the suspension of disbelief consistent. And I'm a very harsh critic, especially of people ruining things that I love. But that will always stick with me. And like I think about that all the time when I have a giant spreadsheet for my fake town for the series that I'm working on, which is contemporary, but involves an enormous amount of world building because it's a fake Massachusetts town with like, I think I've got like 200 residents in my spreadsheet, and they all have addresses, and it's a whole thing. My
I
second
am
one,
blown away by that. That is incredible.
oh, if you want, I can screen share it. It has surprised friends of mine who are not autistic like I am, because they're like, "How do you do this?" And I say, "This is comforting to me." My second point is that a good friend of mine wrote a series called The Gardener's Hand, which is a fantasy series that takes place on a world that night and day are not times of day, they're places, because it's a tidally locked planet. So some of the planet's really hot, some of it's really cold. You can only live in a thin strip in the middle. And she did this brilliant way of not just info dumping at you, of the main character is obsessed with a book series that takes place in our world, or in a world like our world, a world with day and night, happening cyclically. And so she explains this whole concept, which is really hard to grasp because, you have to not say, it's getting dark. She woke up when it was still dark. The noon light, any of that, because it doesn't happen. But she managed to take this whole concept and just explain it in like 3 sentences, saying she picked up her favorite book, which had this bizarre concept of night and day as times instead of places. And you were like, oh, that's how this works. And that's something that I'm really jealous of, and I wish that I'd thought of. But finding a clever way to make that info dump click instead of just being a Neil Stevenson paragraph of information, or like Herman Melville's whales, or
I love Moby Dick, unironically. I think it
or
is
or
hilarious.
Victor Hugo's descent into the sewers. We're not trying to do that in our spec fic books. We're not Victor Hugo. So
No. I have a theory that a lot of fantasy authors especially use details to create the suspension of disbelief, and that is why you see a lot of fantasy writers going sort of purple prosy descriptions of food or really detailed descriptions of banquets and what everyone was eating, because eating is something that everyone does, and it's a quick way to insert some reality into an otherwise fantastical setting. So it looks like you share this theory.
I'm
I
just
do
thinking
this
about
all the
Redwall.
time.
Yeah.
It's actually
And
something.
tapping into emotions as well. Like, it might be that you've just fought a giant sea monster, and you're freaking out about it. But writing that freak out can be really like, well, it's just like the anxiety attack I had the other day. Like, this is how it felt, and this is what it was like, and this is how people dealt with it.
Metaphors. Yes. I love
I think
that.
when you add in tidbits of reality of what everybody experiences in their day-to-day lives, it becomes easier for a reader to take that and extrapolate it and relate to it. But at the same time, we can expound on that. Like, I mean, who would ever put cinnamon sticks in their demon contracting box? Like, but when you go and you describe the aroma that wafts out of the box 20 years later and had that hint of cinnamon along with the trail vapors of a demon, people are gonna readers are going to imagine the demon trail wisps on their own, but everybody should be able to go, oh, cinnamon, cool, I never would have put that together. But it allows people to ground themselves into something that they can relate to. Now it's up
It
to
al
us as authors to take them somewhere out where they never thought they would go.
it also that makes a lot of sense to me because, sulfur is awful, it's an awful smell, cinnamon is lovely, Feb and I imagine it is, before we had Febreze, we had cinnamon and lavender, and you're kind of yeah, counteracting the demon with all these beautiful, lovely domestic smells. I love it. In our, what panel was it? Editing from an editor panel, Jamie asked the question, what trends or tropes or just things in writing generally our editors wanted to see more of. I'm going to turn that around and ask everyone what sci-fi fantasy trends are they enjoying and want to see more of, and alternatively, what you would like to see less of. So we'll start with the positives. What do you want to see more of? And let's go to Rebecca and Thea because we haven't heard from them in a while.
What do I want to see more of? Oh my gosh. Look, I think I said before, I honestly never grow tired of reimagined fairy tales. There are just so many cool and interesting and fun things you can do with them. Like, one of the. Can you stop, please? Please, please, please. One of the things that I found people commented on in reviews of Finding Aurora was that I wrote consent into the Sleeping Beauty tale, and they're like, how did she do that? It works. I don't know how you do that though. She's asleep, but that was pretty cool. So there's so many things, and I very rarely read a reimagined fairy tale that I don't enjoy. Like I've seen in Nine Star Press's Once Upon a Rainbow series where they did lots of those. One of my favorite stories was Jeff's, actually. But I remember there also being stories in there with sort of like Red Riding Hood type thing, but where the wolf is sort of like a trans character and is looking for their pack. And, there's all these really interesting directions you can take fairy tales. So honestly, I will never, ever tire of that. In terms of less, look, I don't know. I know that it's more targeted groups of certain tropes. So, for example, when vampires went from being this really incredible dark adult concept to, fodder for young adult fiction, I was just like, no. Like Lestat wasn't sexy because he shone in the sun. Come on, like that. I found so it wasn't so much the vampire trope; it was the redirection, and I didn't enjoy the audience level that it went to. And it's so. For example, someone mentioned Naomi Novik just before, and I'm really loving her Scholomance books because they take the same tropes that Harry Potter's got with the magic school. I think the magic school is a big thing in a lot of books. But honestly, I didn't really like Harry Potter, and contrary to popular opinion, I get students get shocked by that all the time. But I love the Scholomance book because it made it really dark. It's a magic school, but the school's trying to kill them. And it's young adult fiction, and I normally don't like young adult fiction. But there's no teachers. They just have to survive everything in the actual school trying to destroy them. And that's great. So honestly, I'm a big fan of the concept of there's no trope that can't be rescued. Or that can't still be good. So yeah, not really answering the question, sorry.
That was brilliant. I am delighted to hear that I'm not the only person out there who did not enjoy Harry Potter. I made it to book 5 and no further.
Look, you did better than me. I watched all of the films because my ex absolutely loved Harry Potter, and I could sit through the films well enough, but I made it 35 pages into the first book. I'm like, I can't deal with this. I can't. And then I read bits and pieces here and there because, as an English teacher, my students kept trying to convince me of how good it was. I'm just like, sorry, guys, I can't.
Okay, who's next? I'm going to nominate Jamie.
I can go. One of my favorite things, and it's not something I've seen done well a lot, is like a slow reveal of what the world actually is. So it's like world building almost by omission. So some examples of that are like Sunshine by Robin McKinley, where she wakes up in a certain situation with a vampire, and slowly over the course of the book you find out that vampires are just known in this world, and there's all this other stuff going on. It's just like, ha! And she never wrote a sequel, which is very, very annoying. Or there's a book called Feed, where the main characters they've got a constant feed in their head of information of the internet and stuff, and I think it's 2/3 of the way through before you realize that that's not normal for the whole world. It's just something that America's done, and you're like, what? So I really love that. I always sort of try to do some of that in my work, but I don't feel like I'm clever enough to do it well. So I love that. I also really love found family stuff. Again, that came up earlier in the editing for the editors. Books like Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, or TV shows like Firefly, where you just have these kind of mismatched people, but they all have each other's backs and stuff. It's very fun. Consent was brought up just before. It was a really big thing for me as well. I've tried to do that in my romance novels, and I've had some really good feedback about it, which is cool. Let's keep doing that. In terms of what I don't want, I've only just got one thing on my list, which is there's this incredible book called Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson, whatever his name is, that everyone, or a whole lot of guys told me I had to read because it was about superheroes, and I love superheroes. And the point of view character just drove me crazy. I couldn't stand him. He was this, you were right in his head. He was this boring ass straight boy. And every time he saw the girl, we had to hear how gorgeous she was and how sexy and how beautiful her hair was and how she didn't like him. And a few times she just turned him down, and he just kept sexualizing her in the text, and I couldn't get past it. I couldn't read the next book. Even though I really like the world and I really like the ideas, I was just like, I'm over it. I don't want this male gaze anymore in my point of view characters. So that's
Male
it. That's my thing.
gaze, no.
You know what you said about the slow unfolding. It reminds me of I don't know if you have read The Girl with All the Gifts, which unfortunately the movie version did not do it justice. But
Yeah, it's a
sorry,
great book.
cat and child now. But honestly, the opening of that, I just found it one of the best slow reveals I've ever seen.
That
So
book was phenomenal.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my
I
gosh, so
had to stop partway through because it was giving me nightmares, but I did get through the whole thing in the end.
Awesome. So, Jeff or Val, who wants to go next? Let's go with Jeff actually, since Val kind of answered this question already on our editing for editors panel.
Things I want to see more of in terms of fantasy. I want to see in urban fantasy, anyways. I want to see more books about um, the mythological creatures that are not our uh, Anglo-European, North American standard fare. Like I love, don't get me wrong, I love my vampires and werewolves, but we've done them to death. Um, I'm going to steer everybody towards Dorian Graves books, the Deadly Drinks series. Amazing, amazing, amazing. They have put together stories that incorporate Japanese farabis and introduced lamias and motorcycle riding minotaurs. Like it's so. I described her world in an earlier session today as fairyland on a hit of acid. It's just so unbelievably different and gifted. And I want more of that. I think there's so many awesome folklore from around the world that we should be tapping into and utilizing. And my new um, book, Summoned, uh, there is the Fae in there, and I'm doing that. I've already in the second book that I'm outlining, I'm already pulling from um, Japanese Fae, South African Fae, South Pacific Fae, and pulling that in because I think it's another layer of richness that we don't get and we need more of. There is one thing that I tried once, I cannot ever do it and will not ever do it again. And I know that there's a big group of people that just truly love and enjoy, but if I never see another Mpreg story, I'll be just fine. I can't. And I apologize deeply to all those people who hold that dear because there's a staunch community out there that love it. And that's fine. You can have my share of that cake slice because just can't.
Before we move on, I want to echo what Jeff said about Dorian Graves. In March, Dorian and I were on a reading panel together, and Dorian read an excerpt of their book that introduced the motorcycle riding minotaur, and it was hilarious. So not only do you have these amazing creatures that you do not see in ordinary you do not typically see, he was a complete dude bro, and it just was everything. So
And
yeah.
Dorian is such a fantastic reader. Yeah.
Yeah. Val, do you have anything you'd like to see more or less of specifically
Oh,
in a
yes.
sci-fi setting? I know zombies and cannibals we can do without.
No list for me. I've seen too many of them. But for me, the big thing that I desperately want more of is working class sci-fi and fantasy. Things like, well, on TV, The Expanse right now, which if you're talking Found Family, that's a real banger. And Alex Axe's work. I don't know if any of you know his work, but Hunger Makes the Wolf is about a mining town, and it's got witches and motorcycles and labor disputes. And I desperately want more speculative fiction unions because I'm a big union person. I have a lot of
I love that. I'm gonna steal this somehow.
And another one that is amazing is a classic. Lois McMaster Bujold's first for Kosygin book, Falling Free, is about space unions. And again, phenomenal. And there's not enough, there's a lot of like, we're sort of space cowboys. There's a lot of we're space military, we're space rich people, but not a lot of like, we're just trying to get by, doing our jobs, fighting the man. But like fighting the man who's the boss, not like the man who's the empire.
Have you read Sisters of the Vast Black by Nina Rother?
No.
Oh, it's a novella. It's not
Okay.
quite what you're describing, but it's a little bit in that direction. It's about a group of nuns who are like they're like missionary nuns flying through space on a living spaceship. But honestly, most of them are not that into the religion. It was just a job in an era where it was hard to get a safe, secure job. And it's quite interesting because they're completely distanced from the Earth theocratic society that they work for, and they visit mining communities and they visit people who basically they would be if they weren't part of this missionary work. And yeah, I feel like maybe you would enjoy it.
Oh yeah, that sounds exactly like my jam. Yeah, I'm writing that one
anyway,
down.
all about the book records.
Yeah,
Yep.
for things I
So
want less of, the only thing I have to say is, because we mentioned George R.R. Martin earlier, bad things happening to characters who are good just because it's fun to make bad things happen to characters that are good and we want to be edgy. We don't need that.
Yep.
We've had enough. The world is bad enough. Let's stop that. That's all.
Yep, I could not agree more. So we are rapidly running out of time. So over on the Discord channel, we have had Jason W say he would love the panelists to provide their recommendations here. He was not getting them while we were talking at first, always looking for new urban fantasy reads. Jamie has already been sharing some very awesome looking books. So I encourage everyone to keep the conversation going by hopping over to the Discord and joining the Inclusive World Building channel there. I'm going to have to disappear because I am about to take part in the publishing process, talking about trad, self-publishing, hybrid and small presses with the wonderful Ava Kelly. And at the same time, we have readings with romance hosted by Kevin. And it looks like both Jamie and Rebecca will be taking part in that. So if you want to actually hear what Jamie and Rebecca write, check that out. Before we say goodbye briefly, if our audience wants to catch up with you and learn more about you, where can they find you on social media?
I'm usually under Jamie Sands author, but I will put all my links into the InfoSwap channel to make it easy.
Sounds great.
I'm on
Same.
Twitter at Ghostal Service.
I've just got rebeccalangham.com.au, or on Twitter you can find me rlangham85. But yeah, the website's got all the links as well, and it's just my name.com.au.
Awesome.
And yeah, all my links are listed on the Discord server, and I'm everywhere. Too much social media, but always just look for JP Jackson.
Are you on TikTok?
No, I refuse. Absolutely refuse.
I'm there. Come on, it's cool.
I love the vehemence of Jeff's reaction there. Okay, I'm going to say goodbye and kick you guys out of the stream, but it was absolutely fantastic. I had a blast. Thank you so much for being part of this.
Thanks, Jillian.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.